Hey everyone, Runecloak here, or should I say Raincloak, as today I'm going to be going over the new Skellige cards for the upcoming Claw and Dagger expansion. And as I just made a joke about, the new Skellige cards are all about rain, which is an archetype I really enjoy, but I think, is weak in certain ways, and these new cards I think will shore up those kind of potential weaknesses of the rain archetype. So first up is Anglerfish. So Anglerfish is a 3-power, 5 provision beast. It reads, at the end of your turn, if there is rain or storm on both enemy rows, summon self from your deck to your ranged row. At the end of your turn, if neither enemy row has rain or storm, move self to the bottom of your deck. So this is one of those kind of auto-thinner type cards, sort of similar to Redanian's Secret Service, and it'll pop out the deck based on certain provisions. This one has more stats. It's 3 power versus 1 and 5 provisions versus 6. And then it doesn't have really an active ability that can benefit it once it's on board. In fact, it has a potential downside in that if your opponent's rows are empty of rain or storm, it'll go back in the deck, kind of like, it needs some kind of water to be out there. So it's pretty interesting. So you really want to be keeping rain on at least one of your opponent's rows for every round, and it's also, you're always going to be wasting at least one, at least in these earlier rounds, which is more likely when you want to thin out the Anglerfish, because you'll be ending your turn with rain on your opponent's side of the board, otherwise you're losing 3 points. And conditionally that could be helpful, like if you're already ahead by so many points, you overkilled your opponent in like round 1 or 2, and you want the Anglerfish to pop back into your deck, you can kind of time it so you run out of rain just as the round ends, and the Anglerfish will go back for tempo in a different round. So that's one way it can be a benefit. Of course, it'll go back in your deck, and you don't want to draw it, as it'll be a brick. But I think Rain needed this. The Rain archetype didn't have any kind of consistency tools that worked with it too much. Like, you just use general things like Royal Decree or Anamancy, or thinners like Roach or Best Boy. So I like the Anglerfish in that sense. Sometimes I would play Crow Messengers in my Rain deck, but what's the benefit of Anglerfish over Crow Messenger is they're not cards you have to play from hand. They're just going to pop out on their own, and you don't have to have any other kind of conditions like keeping an alchemy card in hand. I mean, you have several, but still. So I like them in that sense, and often Rain can really suffer against control matchups. So what can be nice is, like, even if you're playing one engine a turn, like a Messenger of the Sea, or even a Melcine Cultist, or even like a little Half-Root can kind of be considered an engine, and they're just getting answered. You can hold off on putting Rain on multiple rows until your opponent passes, and then you have 6 tempo just right off the bat by putting Rain on multiple rows right before the end of the round. And the other cards that we'll see here support that idea as well, kind of forced on interactivity to then get a nice tempo swing near the end of the round to take it from your opponent. So I think Anglerfish can be helpful for those kind of round strategies, and the next card helps with that as well. So next up we got Sea Serpent, 1 power, 5 provisions, also a beast. Super cool art also. I mean, I'm really loving the art for this expansion, and Gwent art in general I think is top tier. But the ability for Sea Serpent is deploy, boost self by 0, and damage enemy unit by 3. And then increase that boost by 1 for each opponent turn in which rain or storm triggered this round. So this is another card that I think really benefits Rain and balances out some of its weaknesses, right? So this is like a finisher card, and Rain has to have a lot of engines, so you're kind of either... And Rain is also kind of an engine, you want to play it early, you want to make sure that all your Rain gets value, especially if you're not committing Ryogen in that same round. So in this way, you can be just trying to keep Rain on your opponent's side of the board as much as possible. And this isn't per row, so this is really only a 1 point per turn engine, but this is the kind of engine that it's like a reverse engine, right? It's getting points before it goes onto the board, and then afterwards it doesn't. So this is another card you can hold off playing, try to get your other engines to stick, and even if they don't, then you'll have this card that's been building up your hand steadily. So as a 5 provision card, you kind of want it to get like an average of 8 points. For it to be like on par with other 5 provision cards. So right off the bat, it's 4 tempo, 4 points on its own. So you want at least like 4 turns of Rain, I think, to go by before you feel comfortable playing this in a way where you're getting good value. But it can be a good point slam card too, and the longer the round goes on, the better. And Rain really likes long rounds, gives you extra turns for your Rain to get value. It makes sure your messengers can really do well. And you have a lot of engines, and like I said, Rain's also kind of an engine. And if you're committing Ryogen in that kind of round, then you want to make sure and they can really stack a bunch of rain, and that your opponent has enough units on their rows that you have rain or storm in, so you get extra value from that. Because if your opponent has like one armored unit on a row, then your rain's getting like no value, and that kind of that really is exaggerated with like the messengers too, which won't be boosting, which makes them more vulnerable, and so on and so forth. So this card at least will be getting value in those kind of situations, but also just over the course of the round. So this can be really good in like a round 1 situation, which often tends to go very long, especially as your opponent might want to win the round and bleed you round 2. And that's even more so if they don't have like graveyard hate, like a squirrel or something to deal with your Ryogan, or to deal with your messengers coming back, or if you're playing Melusine for Melusine to come back. So your opponent tends to play pretty aggressively against rain, I think, in round 1. And so this is great in that respect, because you can keep playing into the round as much as you're able to, and then slam the Sea Serpent. And at most, like let's say, well, you really don't want to put rain on an empty board, so let's say like 7 to 8 on the greedier end of things for Sea Serpent. And that's like an 11 to 12 point card for 5 provisions. Plus it does damage, and damage is really nice too. Rain doesn't have a lot of control, so this can help finish things off, and it'll further synergize with one of the high-end gold cards that we'll see, the Kraken. Just being able to kill that. But I'll talk about that more when I'm going over the Kraken. But yeah, having some control like this, even just 3 points of damage, can be really nice, and help finish off like an opponent's engine that's been damaged by rain or storm, and you can just take it out. So I like in that sense too. So you could play Sea Serpent earlier, and then you're kind of getting the value back. You're missing it from not keeping it in hand with more rain turns, but by getting rid of an opponent's engine, you're kind of getting points that way by preventing them from getting points. So it's a granular card. It's a very interesting engine. Like I said, I kind of think of it as a reverse engine, and I think it's very beneficial to rain, because you don't just be playing one engine a turn, watching him get answered, and then end up with no points. So this gives you a finisher. It gives you a way to passively gain points throughout the round, even when your main game plan isn't going to plan. And I think it's just very cool. Alright, let's go to the next one. So Kelpie. Kelpie's an awesome card. Also, I mean, again, the art is just so cool. I'm definitely going to make this premium. And as you can see, the background is from this Kelpie card, and rightfully so. So Kelpie is a 4 power, 9 provision epic card, so you can't get it from Compass, and it has the ability to deploy. Spawn rain on an enemy row for 0 turns, and this value is increased by 1 for each 3 beasts in your starting deck. So actually some beast synergy for this Skellige rain beast kind of deck that's forming here. And then it has a passive ability as well. Whenever an enemy unit takes damage from rain or storm, boost a random unboosted allied beast by 1. So Kelpie is really the main beast support card that came out this expansion. I mean, there's other beast cards, and the Kelpie, the Kraken kind of works with that as well. Again, I'll talk about that. But Kelpie encourages you to put beasts directly in your deck, and putting a good number of them. I think on average, Kelpie should get like 3 to 5 turns of rain, which is 15 beasts is a lot on the 5 end, so I don't really see more than that. I think 3 to 4 will be more on average. Some of the decks I've been working on have had that amount, like between like 9 to 13 beasts, so that puts it at like 3 or 4 turns of rain, which is pretty good, and you have a lot of sources of rain in a rain deck. It is nice that they added a new card that gives rain as well, and not just rain payoff cards like the Sea Serpent and Anglerfish. So I like that for that sense. Again, you do want to play this. The thing with like these rain cards is you kind of want to play them. You can't play them right away, right? Your opponent needs cards on a row and on the same row for your rain to get value. But this is nice. It kind of works like Messengers of the Sea in that you're getting extra points for your rain. And it's really only when your enemy takes damage. I don't think this will count armor. Messengers don't count armor, so it shouldn't. But so you kind of want to be swarming the board with beasts. So the sirens you get from like Tears of the Siren or your leader chargers are good for that. I've also been playing around with the idea of putting Seagull in my deck. It's another beast staff in the board, and it can get you 4 beasts at the same time, giving your Kelpie just extra points right away, especially in different kind of rounds. So I like that idea. You're playing a lot of beasts in your deck. Messengers are beasts that you're playing, but they're boosting themselves, so that shouldn't work out. But what can be nice here is cards like Little Halfroo or Melusine, which damage themselves, and then so they're going to be unboosted for a little while longer rather than just like a base card like Roach or like Fukusha, right, which don't boost, but also can only get one boost from the Kelpie. So I think those cards are also pretty good with the Kelpie there. Like I said, having multiple turns of getting boosted by Kelpie, or multiple procs depending on how much rain or storm damage that's happening, all in the same just like couple units. So I think that's pretty cool. It's like I said, it can be also a Fukusha target, this Kelpie. I mean, often you're playing like those Bronze Engines or Ryogen or something, but Kelpie could conditionally be pretty good. And then you're putting another beast on the board on the same turn with Fukusha there, so it can get boosted up right away from the Kelpie's rain. And it's another threat for your opponent to answer. It doesn't protect itself, it's allied units, so that should just be other beasts. So it may be a little easier to answer potentially than like a messenger that'll boost itself. But there, you have so many threats, and this is nice. It trades up to removal by putting rain on your opponent's row on the same turn, so you're at least getting that rain value, and potentially some of that boosting some unboosted allied beasts on the same turn. So I think it's a cool card. I think it's pretty good. I think it's definitely an important card. It'll be a valuable card to put in rain. But I'm excited to see how this works out. And then we got one more card here, and that's the legendary. So this is the Kraken. And this is a 6 power, 13 provision beast. And it's disloyal. I think the first disloyal Skellige card. It has a pretty crazy ability. I think this is a cool card. But it's conditionally good, which is, I like it, right? But so it's disloyal, and then deploy, move 3 enemy units to this row. So you're playing this on your enemy's opponent's side of the board, and then it'll basically drag 3 units to its same row. So then it'll have the Kraken and 3 other units on that row. And then it damages those 3 units by 2 and spawns Storm on that row for 3 turns. It also has a Death Wish, where it'll summon Stealth to the opposite row and boost Stealth by the number of unique allied beasts. So this is more of that beast synergy type aspect. The deploy part of it first, let's go over. So what's nice about this is often your opponent will row stack to avoid playing into having rain on multiple rows, because that's just better for your, as the rain player, your game plan for like messengers, and getting extra value on that, because then you're pinging their side of the board like 4 points a turn with rain. I mean, row stacking is worse against Storm, but currently there's not a lot of ways to put Storm on your opponent's side of the board besides the card Skellige Storm, and then Fulmar, which can easily and often gets answered. So having this as a way to kind of counteract that, so not only does it discourage your opponent from row stacking too much, unless they row stack completely, fearing that the Kraken will go upon that row, but you can also put Kraken on the other row that they haven't been stacking in and drag some units there, so you can get that rain or storm on both rows and start getting value there. I mean, your opponent needs to play enough units for it to be worthwhile, but even just if they have the 4 units and the Kraken can put them all in one row and then damage them by 2. So that's one thing with the Kraken, is you're playing it on the other side of the board, so it is 0 tempo, so you can't play it last, otherwise it's really doing nothing. So you need a couple turns, and then it spawns Storm for 3 turns, so you want to play it kind of in the middle of the round, maybe even a little earlier, because you also want that Death Wish to activate, right? The Storm value is pretty good, right? It's 12 points of damage across the Kraken, and then the 3 units you've dragged there at least. So on its own, it'll knock itself down to 3 power, which is then when the Sea Serpent can come in and finish it off. If you don't have more weather on that row to ping it down, or you don't have other cards in your arsenal. And you have a lot of cards now that synergize with Storm. Well, I guess with Storm specifically, it's really like Melusine Cultist, and then the Messengers of the Sea themselves, who get a lot of value from more units getting hit by Storm, the better, rather than just Storm existing at all. And then Ryogen as additionally if you don't have enough turns to activate it. So yeah, you want to play it kind of, I think, in longer rounds generally, because you want turns of rain, and then you want these turns of Storm too. You want your opponent to play enough units for the Storm to get enough value, and then you also want enough turns to be able to activate that Death Wish, and also put enough Beast and Unique Beast at that on your side of the board for the Kraken to get value. But I think if the Kraken comes back, you're already pretty happy, because at that point, it's played for, let's just say, in a vacuum, right? So you've brought those 3 units to 1 row. It's just the Kraken of those 3 units. And then it comes back to your side of the board, and let's say you played a Sea Serpent, right? So it's a bit of a combo there. But after 3 turns, the Kraken succumbs to the Sea Serpent. The Sea Serpent itself, that depends on how long the round's been going on, but it's at least 3 turns for the storm, so you can just call that, 7 points on its own. And the Kraken comes back to your side. It'll boost by at least, it should count itself, so it'll boost by at least 2, so that's 8 on its own, plus the 6 plus, I think 6 turns, no, 6 plus 9, yeah, it's like 15 points that you've done on your terms of damage to your opponent's side of the board there. And part of that is the Sea Serpent's value, but that's some hefty points right there. Like, and that's just having, that's like not having any further storm synergy. That's not considering any other beasts that could be on your board or more units that could be on your opponent's board. So I think it's really good. It's pretty crazy. It can get answered when it's on your opponent's side of the board there. It could get consumed, it could get locked, it could get transformed. There's multiple cards now that transform on your side of the board, like Senior in Syndicate or Cursed Knight in Northern Realms. So it's kind of similar in Falsiri in terms of what answers might be used to deal with it, or also in terms of how it interacts, being on your opponent's side of the board and kind of coming back this way through Death Wish. But yeah, that kind of mechanic or what you might use to counter it, again, it's pretty similar. And then one other thing to note about it is it doesn't gain Doomed when it dies. So the Kraken can kind of bounce back and forth. So like if you don't have Last Say, when your Kraken comes back, your opponent has a turn to answer it, and they'll get an extra 6 points at least. I think an extra 7, because I do think it counts itself in the way it's worded there. So if they answer the Kraken in their last turn, then that's an extra 7 points on their side of the board, in addition to the 6 they just spent to remove it. So you've got to be a little bit careful and be wary of what kind of answers your opponent has. Again, your Rain is going to be a threat overload, really engine-heavy deck. So hopefully you can stretch your opponent's removal thin enough where by the time the Kraken is big and strong on your side of the board, that they may not have another answer to deal with it. But that is something to consider with it. It's a very chaotic, powerful creature, so you've got to be able to watch out for it well and keep an eye on it, because it may just turn on you. Alright, and I think it's about all I have to say on the Kraken here, but I do have a deck that I've been working on. It's, again, a deck concept, same as my last 2 videos where I went over. But let's see. So this is a full provision Rain deck. I did make a Golden Necker deck, but it's basically the same deck, just with some provision shifted around. I didn't get to play Melusine, Melusine, the Kraken, Fukusha, in order to play like Golden Necker, Compass, and Siri and stuff like that. But I like this version better, because if you're playing Golden Necker, then your Compass is really torn between Kraken and Fukusha. I think those are some of the main targets that you'd pick, in addition to more conditional ones like a Tier for tall removal. But I wanted to be able to play the new cards, and I think Kraken's really good in different rounds too. You can use it to win round 1 if you must. Again, its tempo is a little bad, so that's not always the best way to go with it. I think it is more of a round 3 card, but it could be pretty good. And if you're like bleeding your opponent, like maybe it's a mirror, then Kraken, you'd be happy to have Kraken in your hand and in your deck rather than from a Compass in round 3. So other than that, I mean, a lot of the ways to build Rain, I think it's still, there's certain cards you want to have, and I guess the more synergistic cards you add, the fewer cards you're putting in that are like neutral tech cards, right? So I don't have like a Heat Wave, I don't have like a Roach. I do have some other ways that this works out, and also just to note here, Kraken is Triss Meteor Shower right now, Kelpie is Vesemir Mentor, King Cobras they're basically, they're Anglerfish, and then the Highwaymen are Sea Serpent. And what's funny about these, I mean, this one is a Serpent card, and these ones thin themselves, so they're kind of between the 4 of these bronze cards. They're the Anglerfish and the Sea Serpents, right? So I wanted to get good value from these beast payoff cards with the Kraken and with the Kelpie, right? The Kelpie right here. I have 13 beasts in the deck total. A lot of them are pretty unique, and I have doubles of the bronze cards plus 1 Seagull. Again, I think Seagull has some interesting synergy with Kelpie. You also have ways of actually controlling cards. In addition to Rain or Storm finishing off a unit, you have these Sea Serpents now, which will do 3 damage, and ideally you want to finish off an enemy unit anyway, unless you want that row to get more Rain or Storm value. So, I mean, that's not always the case, but it can help with your Seagulls there, giving them carryover, and that's 4 bodies on your row for your Kelpie to boost, which can just give it some instant value there without having to spend too many turns setting up these beasts, especially because you're going to be setting up these Messengers of the Seas, which gets boosted on their own. We also have Melusine in here. It's a nice short round option. It's a good backup resurrection target with Sigdrifa's Right for Ryogen. In case Ryogen gets squirreled, it'll kind of stretch your opponent between those options to squirrel them away. And with so much rain that we do have, we can Bard of the Sea and double Sigdrifa. Even if there isn't any graveyard hate, we can play both of these. We have Kraken here. Again, I think it's a good long round card. It's a good powerhouse in itself. It's also nice in cases where your engines haven't been able to get set up properly, and so you can just play a powerful card like the Kraken, and especially in that kind of instance, I think your opponent might be lower on removal, hopefully. I mean, we'll see what kind of control heavy decks are in the meta next season. I know there's quite a few right now between like pirates and bounty stuff. Fukusha's still a great high-end card. You can use it to resurrect a messenger, putting rain on the board right away. You can resurrect Ryogen, putting extra rain there too. Again, Kelpie's an extra target. Sea Serpent could be okay. You'd want to play that late in the round and then probably follow it up with a Ryogen to make use of that Fukusha rain. But that's conditional. And I mean, Seagull's just a 4 Private Vision bronze. We also have more resurrections with the Sigdrifa's Right, which I talked about as targets, and we also have these Freya's Blessing. So we have a lot of strong bronze cards. You can play your messengers again after they've been answered or across different rounds. You can play your little half-ru, hopefully with Bonded. You can resurrect your Sea Serpents near the end of the round and play more of them. So they're just a good flexible alchemy card, also a target for Bard of the Sea. You should have rain on your opponent's side of the board, hopefully between all rounds, so you'll at least be able to resurrect that Freya's Blessing. We also have Tears of the Siren as a little 4 provision alchemy. It can just be a nice way to put rain on the board. Also Sirens for your Kraken or your Kelpie. And it's, again, a little extra target for Bride of the Sea, just in case it's maybe an earlier round, right? Maybe your graveyard's not set up and you have Bride of the Sea in hand and you want to play it to win the round or something like that. We have Artifact Compression. It just worked out with the provisions, and I think it's nice. There should be, I think, based on what we've seen so far of the card reveals, and even like a mirror, for example, it's nice to be able to reset and lock an opponent's engine so it can't just regrow if it's not the last card you're playing. And I think it's just a pretty good card. And it's a lock option as well. And this deck's pretty greedy, and without a lot of control. So it can be nice. I think it's nice having a card like this that does multiple things. And it's okay to lose some of the points potentially if you lock like a card like a Dana Caretaker, right? So it's a 0 tempo, but you should be able to catch up with some of your rain stuff. And those kind of tempo swing cards I've talked about, like Sea Serpents and the Anglerfish. And even Seagull, right? Because Seagull's a good carryover type card that can come out in different kind of rounds. Let's see. We also have Arcane Tome. It's a good consistency tool. And it can, if your opponent gives it back, you have a lot of specials you can play that put more engines on your board at the same time. Maybe a Royal Decree or a Sigdrifa's Right or Freya's Blessing, so that you can play multiple threats in the same turn, hopefully giving them better chance of sticking. Of course, your opponent could then play multiple removals in the same turn if they have special removal cards, but you can't think too much of what kind of decks your opponent can have, I think, in terms of deck building, especially before the patch is even live. Like, some of these cards get reworked or changed or buffed or nerfed, or your opponent's decks as well. So I think, at least for me, for theory crafting, I like to think more of what I want to do with the deck and then adjust it as need be, as I find out the meta and what kind of, and especially in this sense too, where I don't know what the full patch is going to look like. So this is definitely subject to change. I did want to be able to fit in some kind of Purify cards, like a Grimace could be good, with a lot of options to Purify, or even like just a Peller, right? And Purifies can be good too if your opponent answers the Kraken. And then, a Squirrel could also be a consideration depending on the meta. It's good in the mirror, being able to remove like a Ryogen, or against Insectoids, especially against their Hive Mind. But I think this might have a pretty good matchup into Insectoids with all the rain and against their Swarm. So we'll have to see. And that's something too, is like, how are these matchups actually going to work in practice? See, yeah, but this deck is very consistent. The Anglerfish offer good thinning and tempo. Ryogen, of course, thins himself, and then we have Decree and Arcane Tome for some consistency tools that can get you cards that you want when you want them. Melusines a card you definitely want in earlier rounds, so having a Royal Decree for her makes sense. Or Operator also is a good card to have early on to be able to get an extra messenger. And Operator's nice too in this deck because you're putting a unit on your opponent's side of the board earlier on, meaning you can start doing your rain things just a little bit earlier. And unless it's a mirror or against Assimilate, then giving them a messenger shouldn't really do much for them, while it gives you an extra one for a lot of value. So that's pretty much the deck. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed.